Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Shanna Hendriks, Head of Business Development at NIA. Shanna, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Thank you so much, Nicola, for having me. I moved to Silicon Valley in 2004. At the time, I was doing public relations, communications. So I started working at a small boutique PR firm in San Francisco. They've grown today, and it's amazing to watch that happen and be present and local for that as well. So I started at Launch Squad. And at that time, I was doing public relations for startups. So the firm would work with companies that we invest at NEA in today and really help them define their message and pitch their story to media and help them launch their company. And then I left there and went and did public relations on the consumer side. And so I worked with a firm up in Seattle doing a lot of more winter sports, public relations and communications. And then went to, after doing that for a little while, left and went to a large agency called Hill & Knowlton. And they do PR for large Fortune 500s. Companies or larger startups at the time. That was their focused area. And I worked there for several years. And then I went in-house to two different large corporates, Shutterfly, and then followed by Tesla. And then it was really from Tesla where I joined NEA. And I joined NEA to be part of the marketing and communications team. Arguably, it was probably the first platform or portfolio services hire that they made that really pushed that team to exist here at NEA. And about 6 months into being here at NEA, we saw an influx of interest from corporates who wanted to come to the Valley and understand what was happening out here, who they needed to know to be innovative, what firms could help them find startups to work with to help them with their digital transformation. And we just saw a steady drumbeat of interest. And so for about a year and a half, I supported marketing and communications while also supporting what we didn't know at the time, or what we didn't label at the time as business development, but just corporate relationships. And about a year and a half of doing both of those jobs, we figured that this was probably a full-time gig for somebody. And I was lucky enough to raise my hand and say, I'd happily do this full-time. And like I said, it wasn't a linear line into coming into this role, but I've been working full-time in the business development arena here at NEA for about 7 years. I've been at NEA a total of 9, and it's great. It's one of the best jobs in the world, I think.
And it's one of the best VCs in the world. So
I'm very lucky.
So let me maybe start with double clicking on the peer side, because this is actually a very important discipline that benefits startups as well as corporations. What I find interesting in your background is that you've helped startups as well as Fortune 500. And if you think about startups that VCs invest in, we want them to become the next Fortune 500. Maybe touch on professionalization of these corporate VCs. Are you able, when you meet the corporations, to get a sense that their culture is going to work really well with a local corporate VC, and some of the culture may not be as prone to success? Can you sense it when you talk to the CEO of these companies?
A little bit. I often ask a lot of questions about process. So, for example, they might show, and I guess the process really starts with how they're laying out what their interest areas are. Some corporates have decks of slides and slides upon slides of here's how we want to innovate. Here are all the areas we want to innovate on. That can be really exciting, but it can also be a little overwhelming because I know from experience, you can't do all of that at once, right? It's pushing through 1 or 2 projects at a time, or 1 or 2 startups at a time, is really the most successful way that I've seen, because it can be really a lot of work to embrace these startups and help them navigate. Asking them questions. What is the process after you meet a startup? What then happens? Also, I think one other differentiator between companies that, on their approach, I should say, one differentiator of their approach is, are they working directly with a business unit? How do they work with the business units? Sometimes the CVCs specifically are not engaged with the business unit. Oftentimes those CVCs are much more financially focused. They're focused on the financial return, less so on the strategic. CVCs who are focused more on strategic often work more lockstep with the business units. I've said this publicly in the past. MetLife has always done a really good job of hiring, or excuse me, not hiring, but working with their business units, getting a list of all of the challenges that their business units are facing, and then looking for solutions for those. And so that's probably the biggest highlight for me of how things are going to move forward, is how close they are engaged with the business unit or the CIO team.
And here I feel like there is an interesting, not binary, but two different type of CVCs, the ones that are much more strategic and that involve the business units very deeply, and the ones that are more financial. And I could imagine that at NEA, your investment team would prefer the financial VC in a way that they think the same and they think about the valuation. But the platform team would prefer the strategic CVCs because they come with a clear intent of engagement with the startup and adding value.
Yes, I think we equally welcome relationships with both. I think strategic investors, strategic CVCs can be super helpful to our companies who are looking for either that first customer or that fifth customer or that 15th customer, frankly. And strategic can really add a lot of value to a startup. There's two schools of thought working with strategics. It's work with them because there's opportunity inside of their business. It's don't work with them because they'll just weigh you down and make it really hard to move quick. And so I think as corporates are becoming more attuned to moving quickly and being more dynamic, I think working with strategics can be really helpful.
Very good. So I think it's a great message to the audience. Whether you're financially driven or strategic or hopefully both, you're very welcome at NEA. Maybe you could share how you think about strategic value at NEA when you engage with corporate VCs, because you're also the one leading rounds and deciding how you build a syndicate. And I'm sure there's a lot of strategic elements to building a syndicate you put into.
Yeah, sure. The way I see value from a strategic is going to be slightly different than how one of our investors might see value from a strategic, right? Strategic can be helpful from a customer or a product iteration standpoint. They can provide diligence to our investors if we're looking at a company potentially to invest in, and we want to know, what does this corporate down the street think of this, or what would this go? We think that they would do really well in the beverage market. What do some of the large beverage corporates think of this company? And so having those relationships at those corporates can be really helpful from a diligence perspective. And so that's us asking them, hey, will you take a look at this for us and give us your honest feedback? Because that could determine whether or not we actually invest or not. So there's that piece to it. And then, of course, there's the potential for that strategic to be a customer, right? Some corporates, some strategic investors require them to be a customer of the company before they are able to invest in it. Some corporates don't have that requirement. And so where the corporates do have that requirement, that can be helpful because it's a customer first. And if they're going to double down and make an investment, that's even more solid customer. I think for us on the platform side and for me on the BD side, I think the strategics can be helpful because the relationships that we have go beyond, hey, will you just be a customer of this company? And I touched on that a little on the investor side from a diligence standpoint, but it's also relationships, right? This is a relationship game at the end of the day. And if we can have relationships with corporates who maybe they're not the right target, but maybe they know somebody who is, or in a previous life, they knew somebody who was, then the benefits become from just a relationship and introduction standpoint. That's one area.
And I want to double click on business development because I feel like this is a very deliberate choice of words which show intent. So maybe you can double click a little bit on why business development and how this is driving your actions.
Yeah, that's a good question, Nicola. I've thought a long time about whether or not business development was indeed the right title. Because on one hand, you're right. It is exactly what we are trying to do. We are trying to develop these businesses that are coming to us as newborns and help them turn into these amazing publicly traded companies. But so much of what I do is wrapped around relationship. And so sometimes I think that the a relationship, a title with some form of relationship is key into it. And it's really important for anybody who's interested in getting into business development or in a platform role in doing this kind of work. It's really important to understand that these are relationships that last years. And you don't want to build a relationship. I don't want to have a relationship with you, Nicola, where every time we talk, maybe it's once a quarter, once every 6 months, I'm asking for something. I want to be adding more value to you. And so maybe it's once a year I'm saying, hey, there's this company. Can you take a look at it? That kind of thing. And I do agree. I think business development is an excellent title, but I don't think it captures some of the finer, the finesse of what this role really can be.
Let's move to corporate VCs. What are for you the best attributes of a corporate VC that you really want to engage with?
Yeah, I really like the ones that are engaged with their business units. But I think some great attributes to some of the good corporates that we work with today, and they're more good than bad. I think folks in this role, most folks are new, maybe not new to technology, definitely not, oftentimes not new to the company, but new to the role because it's a newer role. So there's a lot of interest in learning and being active in participating in conversations with us, with our portfolio companies. So the interest to learn is really scores really high. And then developing a team or a culture, I think, on their side that is open to working and engaging with startups is also really helpful. I love getting on calls. I have a lot of quarterly calls or biannual calls, and I love getting on those calls and talking for the first 20 minutes of a 30-minute conversation about a trend. And we're not even talking companies, we're not talking problems, but let's talk about trends and figure out, what, and that kind of helps me understand the direction that these companies are going. And very rarely is it private information. Most of the information we're talking about is public information anyways, but understanding those trends. And if you can get those innovation people to be part of that conversation or to understand the trends that are happening so that that they are also going to be guiding the corporate in that direction, that's really great too, because we can see that the innovation is coming from all areas. And this is a great funnel or great channel into that company. So I love that as well.
I remember our discussion last time we met with you and Greg about generative AI and what that could mean in terms of all our portfolio, but also where we moved next for investments. That was an amazing conversation because there's so many things we don't know. And we have to make hypotheses and then try to test them. So I can totally relate with discussing trends is also a good way to see the match in terms of mindset and being open to innovation, being curious.
That's right. I said to somebody recently, they said, I'd like to talk about Gen AI. And I said, I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it before. Because everybody wants to talk about it, which is great. It's great. AI is going to be just an amazing tool for productivity, of course. And we're already seeing it in our own portfolio. We've gotten some new companies in our portfolio recently on the Gen AI side, but we also have companies like Forethought who have been around forever, or it feels like forever, probably about 5 or 6 years now. And they've been doing AI and LLM since the very beginning, pretty much. And they're attacking the customer service problem, or the opportunity, I should say.
So their timing is now perfect.
Exactly. And that's a trend too, right? Within startups is finding that timing. We've invested in companies in the past and they just haven't been able to find a foothold, and their timing's just off. And then you see 10 years later that they're coming back, and you think, oh, that company that we had 10 years ago or 15 years ago would have been great right now.
I feel like a lot of what we do is about timing. Clearly, financial VC or venture capital is about investing early enough before it's obvious to everyone else. But when I think about timing for the introductions you make and the engagements, you can't have it too early and then nothing stick.
Yeah.
You have to find the right timing. And maybe you could talk about best practices about how do you time it? Like you said, it's not about talking every quarter, but if once a year you find the right time to do this engagement, that goes a long way. How do you think about that timing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd say there's been a shift on the corporate side, on the corporate venturing side, to look at companies earlier. I think 9, 10 years ago, the CVCs that we were working with, they said, call me when they've got many customers, right? Call me at the Series C or D level, and we'll come in with a check, and we'll probably be more strategic, and we'll probably be a customer at that point. More and more, I'm talking to CVCs today who are interested in, I'm not going to say seed. Seed still feels pretty early, but definitely a Series A they're open to. There is one corporate that does work with seeds, and that's just that's the approach they want to take. But oftentimes seed and even Series A still feel a little early for a lot of corporates. In response to your timing question, I think it can be, now that folks are going more early, I think timing is less of an issue if you are talking to corporates who are comfortable at those Series A or B stages. I once had a corporate say, we don't want to be the first customer, we want to be the third customer. And so we know about that company that they don't want to see the company before they've got a couple of customers, they have some footholds in the market, and that's when you can start reaching out. But I would also argue that, again, going back to how important relationships are, let's you and me talk about these Gen AI companies that haven't figured out how to generate revenue yet, but let's talk about them today. And I have zero expectation that you're going to do anything with them, but let me put them on your radar, because you are going to have conversations with your team or with other members of your organization over the next 6 to 9 months. And then maybe in 9 months, we'll say, hey, that company I mentioned has grown. They're doing this, that, and the other thing. And maybe that's the right time to connect you. I try neither to be a bottleneck nor a gatekeeper with our corporate or with our portfolio. And so sometimes corporates say, hey, I want to meet with this company. I leave it up to the company, the portfolio company, to decide, are they ready to talk to that corporate? Because sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes it's, we're not ready for them. We can't have this conversation yet, but we'll come back to you in 6 to 9 months. And that happens too. And it's great to see that founders are comfortable saying not yet to corporates.
Yeah. And I'm guessing over time you calibrate as well, depending on the corporation.
Indeed. Yeah. I would say the first time you meet with a new corporate relationship, right? It's very much high level, get to know, here's about me and here's about you and here's how I came to be in this job. And then the next time you start to scratch a little bit deeper, understand more about culturally how they're working. And then you can also ask them, after you've known them a couple of cycles, you can ask them how it's gone with other portfolio companies that they've worked with in the past. And that's also a good signal as well, because if they haven't done anything with any startups, that can be a red flag a little bit, because it means trying to get things over the threshold is really a challenge. And again, I don't want to be a gatekeeper, but I don't want our portfolio companies to be spinning their wheels when you know that there's not a really good chance of anything happening there.
Yeah, I mean, their time is so precious. You want to protect the entrepreneurs.
That's right.
And corporations could actually be such a drawn on resources, because they have 20 people on one side and the poor entrepreneur on the other side, and you have to make sure it doesn't mismatch.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the value adds that BD folks can add is, hey, this company wants to talk to you, but here is all of my experience over the last 3 to 4 years of talking to this company. And here I just lay out all the cards and I say, you do what you want to do. I'm just giving you the information. And hopefully it's information that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And it helps them make a more informed decision.
I like there's a golden nugget here, I think, which you're implying, which is you make sure they don't feel pressured by you to do these engagements.
Great.
They're decisions, but you spend time to prep them so that if they do decide to engage, they are as well prepared as they can be. So some of our audience are corporations and individuals who are thinking about starting a CVC. What type of advice would you give them as to the value of a CVC, especially as to engage with startups in a respectful way, but to learn about the emerging innovations?
Yeah, a plug for my role, get to know the BD folks at the large venture firms because they can really help you navigate which companies, because it's very overwhelming, right? Sometimes you talk to folks and they say, I'm looking for XY solution. Like if you just relied on the influx of inbound emails through HubSpot that you got, that wouldn't be an efficient way of doing it. And so you can really find efficiencies by partnering with or building relationships with the venture community, the financial investors. So I'd say that's really good. More and more, I'm seeing a platform role develop also in the CVC. So CVCs, they're making tons of investments. They might have 20, 30, 40 investments under their belt at some point. And they also realize that they want to build community within their own portfolio. That piece about community building that we talked about at the top of the call, that also applies to CVCs. And so I'm seeing more platform opportunities. So maybe CVCs want to consider, once they make that investment, who's going to manage the relationships of those portfolio companies, of those startups? Because it can't be the investor. They're busy investing and out at events and traveling and board meetings and all the things. And so if you think as you develop your CVC for the first time, who's really going to manage those relationships? Who's going to be the person that they're going to call? How are you going to disseminate information to them? How are you going to help them? What is your value add to them outside of capital, especially if you're financially motivated, or outside of strategic value? Can you bring one of your portfolio companies into an organization, right? There's tons of global CIO organizations. Can you help portfolio companies find other customers within your network, that kind of stuff? So I think it's important to think broadly. And this is all from my perspective, right? If you asked an investor, they would offer you a different piece of advice. But from a relationship and business development standpoint, thinking through how you're going to manage the portfolio, build relationships with folks, find deal flow, right? Where is your deal flow going to come from? Is it just inbound through your inbox? Again, that's where partnering or having relationships with VCs like NEA can be helpful.
So many golden nuggets. But I think if I was to summarize it, it's you may be thinking about starting a CVC, but don't think about it just for what it is for me, but how am I going to add value to the ecosystem, the entrepreneurs, the other partners, and investing partners.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. And what also I think is coming through this golden nugget is, don't think just about starting with an investment team that will just make investments, but already start holistically thinking about how do you build a portfolio? How do you add value to them?
That's right.
And I wanted the last questions to be about the future also, but also in terms of sustainability. I know NEA has made amazing investments in that space, and I would love to hear from you. What's your wish for sustainability and us as capital allocators, what we can all think about more?
I'm really excited about this generation of sustainability investments. I was in the Valley in the early 2000s when companies like Bloom Energy were being invested in, and Fisker was coming online against Tesla, and it was electric cars were the next big thing. That time didn't go great. It didn't go great, right? We saw great success with Bloom Energy, but there are many clean tech companies that didn't go the distance. And I see it differently this time around. And I see corporates more involved. Obviously, there's political pressure. We're seeing investments in companies like Minimum, who are basically carbon accounting platforms that help corporates, because one day somebody's going to come to them and say, hey, you now have to report all of your carbon emissions and what your sustainability number is. And companies like Minimum are helping CFOs and groups do that so that they're ready for when somebody comes to ask for that. And right now, I feel like CEOs are asking for it already, whether it's financially mandated or not. We have taken the approach this round of sustainability investing to know that we do hardware and software investing really well. And so when we look at a company, we say, is it a great company? Is the technology sound? And then, oh, by the way, it's also sustainability. So we're not leading with our sustainability piece first. We want to make sure that all the tools in the chain, the entire stack is solid, because if it needs to pivot or if sustainability doesn't end up being the end result, it's still a solid product underneath. And so we're really focused on that as well at NEA.
Yeah, we see the same further tailwinds here clearly, but we can see Fortune 500 or even Fortune 2000 becoming customers, creating business cases. And all companies are driven by P&L, and it feels like we're at the cusp of really good business cases, which happens to be greener. Shanna, I want to thank you for your time today and helping the audience to think about how to engage with entrepreneurs, to bring value to them, to be strategic about it, the value of the business unit engagement, but also about reaching out to you, because you're not the gatekeeper, but you're going to prep both sides to make sure there's a really good match.
Yeah, it doesn't help anyone to not have a solid relationship on both sides. Thank you, Nicola. Have a great day.